Laughter echoed through the polished marble lobby of Prescott Dynamics. An elderly janitor had just dropped his mop. As he bent down slowly to pick it up, a group of young employees burst into laughter. "Maybe it's time you retired, old man," one of them mocked. Another smirked. "I've seen turtles move faster than you." The executives walking by didn't stop. Some looked away. Others simply smiled and continued toward the elevators. To everyone in that building, the old man was invisible, just another janitor, just another forgotten employee cleaning floors before disappearing into the background. No one knew his name. No one cared to ask. The elderly man quietly picked up his mop without saying a word. There was no anger in his eyes, no resentment, only the calm expression of someone who had learned long ago that a person's character is revealed not by how they are treated, but by how they choose to respond. Then, the sound of screeching tires shattered the morning silence. 3 black SUVs came to an abrupt stop outside the building. The lobby doors swung open. 5 FBI agents marched inside with unwavering purpose. Their eyes scanned the room. The CEO straightened his tie and hurried forward, convinced they had come to meet him. But the agents walked right past him. They ignored every executive, every manager, every member of the board. Instead, they headed directly toward the elderly janitor, still holding his worn wooden mop. The lead agent stopped in front of him. She stood at attention. The other agents did the same. Then she spoke 5 words that froze every person in the building. "Good morning, Director Hayes. We've found it." The mop slipped from one employee's hands. The laughter vanished. Every face turned pale. The old janitor slowly smiled, as though he had been expecting them all along. How could everyone mock be addressed as director by the FBI? And what secret had he hidden for more than 25 years? The answer would leave an entire company questioning everything they thought they knew about greatness. Every weekday at exactly 5:30 a.m. Long before the first executive stepped into Prescott Dynamics, an elderly man quietly unlocked the side entrance of the towering glass headquarters. His name was Walter Hayes. At 74 years old, his back was slightly bent, his silver hair was neatly combed, and his weathered hands carried the marks of a lifetime of hard work. Every morning followed the same routine. He filled an old yellow bucket with warm water, mixed in the cleaning solution, picked up his worn wooden mop, and began polishing the marble floors until they shined like mirrors. By the time the first employees arrived, the building looked flawless, yet almost no one ever noticed the man responsible for it. To most people, Walter was simply the old janitor. Some walked past without making eye contact. Others were too absorbed in phone calls and business meetings to acknowledge him at all. A few greeted him politely before hurrying toward the elevators. Walter greeted everyone the same way. "Good morning. Have a wonderful day. God bless you." Whether people responded or ignored him, his smile never changed. He believed respect should never depend on whether it was returned. As the morning grew busier, the quiet halls transformed into a whirlwind of expensive suits, clicking heels, ringing phones, and conversations about million-dollar deals. Executives rushed from one meeting to another, while assistants carried stacks of confidential files through the corridors. Walter continued mopping the floors as though he belonged to a different world. One Monday morning, a group of newly hired trainees gathered near the executive lounge while waiting for orientation to begin. Most were in their 20s, confident, ambitious, eager to impress. As Walter pushed his cleaning cart toward the freshly polished hallway, one of the young men deliberately stepped onto the wet floor, leaving a trail of muddy footprint behind him. Another trainee laughed and followed. Within seconds, several others joined in, tracking dirt across the spotless marble Walter had spent nearly an hour cleaning. The group erupted in laughter. "Looks like you've got more work to do, old man," one of them joked. Another folded his arms with a smirk. "Maybe if you move a little faster, you could keep up." More laughter echoed through the hallway. Employees passing nearby noticed the scene. None of them intervened. Some smiled awkwardly. Others pretended not to see. Walter looked down at the muddy footprints. For a brief moment, disappointment crossed his face. Not because they had ruined the floor, but because they had chosen cruelty over kindness. He slowly knelt despite the stiffness in his knees, and began cleaning the mess all over again. One of the trainees expected him to argue. Another expected him to complain. Instead, Walter simply smiled. "No problem," he said gently. "Everyone deserves another chance." His calm response only made them laugh even harder. Standing nearby was Emily Carter, a newly hired financial analyst. Unlike everyone else, she didn't laugh. She watched the elderly janitor quietly clean the floor, without a trace of anger on his face. There was something unusual about him. He didn't carry himself like a defeated man. He carried himself like someone who had once commanded respect without ever asking for it. Later that afternoon, Emily passed Walter near a hallway lined with framed photographs celebrating the company's history. She noticed him stop in front of one old black and white picture, showing the company's founders standing beside several government officials nearly 3 decades earlier. Walter stared at the photograph for several seconds. A faint smile appeared on his face. Not the smile of someone admiring history, the smile of someone remembering it. Before Emily could ask why, the CEO's assistant hurried down the hallway, calling executives into an emergency board meeting. Walter quietly picked up his mop and walked away. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the elderly janitor was hiding a story no one else had ever bothered to discover. And hundreds of miles away, inside a secure federal archive, an aging classified file bearing the name Walter Hayes had just been removed from a locked cabinet for the first time in 25 years. No one at Prescott Dynamics knew it yet. But by this time tomorrow, the man everyone ignored would become the one person no one could stop talking about. The next morning, Walter arrived at Prescott Dynamics before sunrise, just as he had done every weekday for the past 25 years. The city was still asleep. The streets were quiet. Inside the building, only the soft hum of the air conditioning and the rhythmic sound of his mop broke the silence. To Walter, these early hours were peaceful. There were no meetings, no ringing phones, no hurried footsteps, just a man, a mop, and the satisfaction of leaving the building better than he had found it. By 8 o'clock, the headquarters came alive. Luxury cars filled the parking lot. Employees streamed through the revolving doors with coffee cups in hand, talking about deadlines, promotions, and million-dollar contracts. As always, Walter greeted everyone with the same warm smile. "Good morning." Some nodded politely. Most walked past without noticing him. The trainees from the previous day hadn't forgotten him. As they passed the lobby, one of them glanced at Walter and chuckled. "Looks like the old man survived another day." Another laughed. "I guess somebody has to clean up after successful people." Several of them laughed again. Walter didn't react. He simply continued polishing the floor until it reflected the morning sunlight pouring through the glass walls. Emily Carter watched the exchange from across the lobby. Something about it bothered her. She couldn't understand why a man who had done nothing but show kindness was treated with such little respect. Later that morning, Emily found Walter replacing a trash liner near the executive offices. She hesitated before walking over. "Mr. Hayes?" Walter looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Miss Carter." Emily blinked in surprise. "You remember my name?" Walter chuckled softly. "I try to remember everyone's name." Emily smiled. "I'm sorry about what happened yesterday." Walter shrugged gently. "Young people sometimes confuse confidence with wisdom. I hope one day they learn the difference." His words weren't bitter. They were compassionate, as though he genuinely wished the best for those who had humiliated him. Emily studied his face. There was something about him she couldn't explain. "You've worked here a long time, haven't you?" Walter nodded. "A little over 25 years. Were you always a janitor?" For the first time, Walter paused. His eyes drifted toward the large windows overlooking the city skyline. "I've had many jobs." Emily waited, hoping he'd continue. Instead, he smiled. "But this one has taught me the most." Before she could ask another question, Walter politely excused himself and continued down the hallway with his cleaning cart. His answer raised even more questions than it answered. That afternoon, the executive floor erupted into chaos. An important presentation containing confidential information for a major government contract had disappeared just minutes before a board meeting. Executives searched every office. Assistants checked conference rooms. Security locked down the entire floor. The CEO's frustration echoed through the hallways. No one leaves until that file is found. Employees whispered nervously. Then someone quietly suggested the unthinkable. Has anyone checked the janitor? The hallway fell silent. Another executive nodded. He has access to every office in the building. Within minutes, 2 security officers approached Walter. Mr. Hayes, we need to inspect your cleaning cart. Walter stepped aside without hesitation. Of course. They searched every compartment, every cabinet, every trash bag, every cleaning supply. Nothing. There wasn't a single document anywhere in his cart. One of the trainees smirked. Guess he hid it better than we thought. Walter said nothing. Instead, he walked calmly into the conference room where everyone had been searching. He slowly looked around the table. His eyes stopped beneath one of the leather chairs. Without a word, he knelt down and reached underneath. Seconds later, he stood up holding the missing confidential folder. The room fell completely silent. The CEO stared in disbelief. How did you know it was there? Walter gently brushed a little dust from the folder before handing it back. Yesterday afternoon, one of the chairs rolled over it during your meeting. I noticed a corner sticking out while cleaning this morning. I assumed whoever misplaced it would come looking. No one knew what to say. The same man they had quietly suspected of stealing the file had been the one protecting it all along. The CEO cleared his throat. Thank you, Walter. Walter smiled politely. I was only doing my job. As he pushed his cart toward the elevator, Emily noticed something unusual. The company's head of security wasn't watching the executives. He was watching Walter, not with suspicion, but with unmistakable respect. Almost as if he knew a truth no one else in the building had yet discovered. Outside, miles away on the interstate, 3 black government SUVs continued their steady drive toward Prescott Dynamics. Inside them sat 5 FBI agents carrying a sealed case marked with one name, Walter Hayes. By tomorrow morning, that name would bring an entire company to a standstill. The following morning began like every other. At exactly 5:30 a.m., Walter Hayes unlocked the side entrance, switched on the lobby lights, and quietly started another day's work. The polished marble floors reflected the soft glow of the ceiling lights as he pushed his worn cleaning cart across the empty lobby. To Walter, it was just another ordinary morning. But outside the building, history was already on its way. By 9 o'clock, Prescott Dynamics was buzzing with activity. Employees hurried through the revolving doors, carrying laptops and coffee cups. Executives rushed between meetings while assistants prepared conference rooms for another busy day. The events of the missing file had become the talk of the office. Some employees admitted they had judged Walter too quickly. Others insisted it had all been a coincidence. The trainees who had mocked him the day before refused to apologize. One of them laughed. People are acting like he's some kind of hero just because he found a folder. Another shrugged. He's still just a janitor. Emily overheard every word. She looked across the lobby and saw Walter quietly watering a plant near the reception desk before returning to polish the entrance floor. He never looked toward the trainees. He never reacted. His silence spoke louder than any argument ever could. Then, a sharp voice echoed from outside. Government vehicles approaching. The security guards turned toward the entrance. 3 black SUVs rolled to the front gate in perfect formation before stopping directly in front of the building. Every conversation inside the lobby came to an abrupt end. Employees moved toward the windows. Executives stepped out of their offices. Even the CEO looked down from the second-floor balcony. The SUV doors opened. 5 men and 1 woman stepped out, dressed in dark suits. Each carried a leather credential wallet clipped to a belt. Their movements were calm, precise, disciplined. The lead security officer immediately recognized the insignia. His expression changed instantly. He pressed a hand against his earpiece. Federal agents are entering the building. The revolving doors turned. The 6 agents walked inside without hesitation. The atmosphere became so quiet that the sound of their footsteps echoed across the marble floor. The CEO hurried forward with 2 company lawyers. He forced a confident smile. Good morning. I'm Michael Prescott. Chief Executive Officer of Prescott Dynamics. How may we assist you today? The woman leading the team opened her credentials. We're with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The CEO's smile faded. Several employees exchanged nervous glances. Is there a problem? The CEO asked. We're looking for someone. Certainly. Who is it? The lead agent looked across the crowded lobby before calmly answering. Walter Hayes. The CEO frowned in confusion. Our janitor? Yes. I'll have security bring him here. The lead agent shook her head. That won't be necessary. Without another word, she and the other agents walked past the CEO, past the vice presidents, past the board members, past every senior executive standing in expensive tailored suits. Hundreds of eyes followed them across the lobby. Finally, they stopped. Walter stood near the reception desk, quietly wringing out his mop as though nothing unusual was happening. He looked up. A gentle smile crossed his face. It wasn't the smile of a surprised man. It was a smile of someone who had been expecting old friends. The lead agent stepped forward. Without hesitation, she stood at attention. The other 5 agents immediately did the same. The entire lobby froze. Then, in a voice filled with unmistakable respect, she said, Good morning, Director Hayes. A mop slipped from someone's hands. A coffee cup crashed onto the marble floor. One of the trainees took an involuntary step backward. The CEO's face turned pale. Walter calmly extended his hand. It's been a long time, he said. The lead agent shook it firmly. Too long, sir. She smiled warmly. We finally recovered the last archive. Walter closed his eyes for a brief moment. So, after all these years, it's finally over. Yes, Director. No loose ends? None. The employees stared in complete disbelief. No one understood what they had just witnessed. Who was Walter Hayes? Why was the FBI calling the elderly janitor director? And what could possibly be hidden inside an archive important enough to bring federal agents to a corporate headquarters? In just a few moments, the answers would rewrite everything they believed about the quiet old man who had spent 25 years cleaning their floors. The lobby remained frozen. Not a single person spoke. The only sound was a faint hum of the air conditioning as hundreds of employees stared at the elderly janitor standing face to face with 6 FBI agents. The CEO was the first to break the silence. I'm sorry, Michael Prescott said, his voice unsteady. Did you just call our janitor? Director? The lead FBI agent turned toward him. We did. The CEO looked at Walter in disbelief. But he's worked here for 25 years. Walter smiled faintly. Yes, I have. As a janitor. The agent nodded. And long before that, he served his country in ways that very few people will ever fully understand. A wave of whispers spread through the crowd. The trainees who had mocked Walter looked at one another, unable to process what they were hearing. Emily stood perfectly still. She had always believed Walter was hiding something. She just never imagined it would be this. One of the younger employees finally found the courage to ask, Who are you? Walter remained silent. Instead, the lead agent answered. For nearly 3 decades, Walter Hayes directed one of the Bureau's most sensitive interagency intelligence operations. Another gasp swept through the lobby. His work involved protecting national security, coordinating investigations across multiple agencies, and leading teams entrusted with information that remained classified for decades. She paused. Many of the operations he supervised prevented serious threats from ever reaching the public. The employees exchanged stunned looks. One executive whispered, So, that's why no one has ever heard of him. The agent nodded. The greatest victories in intelligence are often the ones the public never knows happened. Walter lowered his eyes. I wasn't seeking recognition. I was simply doing my job. The lead agent smiled. And you did it with extraordinary honor. She opened a secure leather case and carefully removed a thick, weathered folder sealed with an official government emblem. Time had faded the edges of the cover. Across the front were the words, Declassified. She placed the folder into Walter's hands. For the first time that morning, his calm expression changed. His hands trembled ever so slightly. He opened the folder. Inside were photographs of former teammates, letters of commendation, mission reports, newspaper clippings that had never revealed the truth, and finally, a letter addressed to him personally. Walter unfolded it carefully. His eyes scanned the page. Then he quietly smiled. Emily noticed tears beginning to form. Not tears of sadness, tears of relief. The lead agent spoke softly. Director Hayes, the final classified records have now been officially released. She smiled warmly. Your service is no longer a secret. Walter closed the folder and held it close to his chest. He looked upward for just a moment, as though remembering friends who were no longer there. Then the CEO stepped forward. His voice was filled with genuine regret. Mr. Hayes. Walter looked at him. If all of this is true, he hesitated. Why would someone with your background spend 25 years cleaning floors? Every employee leaned forward. It was the question everyone wanted answered. Walter rested one hand on the handle of his old mop. Then he looked around the lobby he had quietly cared for every morning. When I retired, he began, I was offered executive positions, consulting contracts, and opportunities to speak all over the country. He smiled gently. I turned them all down. The room remained silent. My wife was very ill. His voice softened. Before she passed away, she held my hand and gave me one piece of advice. Walter paused. She said, when the titles disappear, make sure you remain the same man. Several employees quietly lowered their heads. So after she was gone, I wasn't looking for another title. I wasn't looking for applause. I wasn't looking for power. He looked down at the worn mop beside him. I was looking for honest work. The trainees who had laughed at him could no longer meet his eyes. Walter continued. This uniform reminded me every day that no job is beneath an honest person. It reminded me that character isn't measured by the office you occupy. It's measured by the respect you show others, especially when no one is watching. Silence filled the lobby once again. This time, no one saw Walter Hayes as an old janitor. They saw a man who had once carried enormous responsibility, yet had chosen a life of humility over recognition. But the FBI hadn't come only to honor him. The lead agent took one step forward. Director Hayes, she said, the Bureau has one final request. The room fell silent once again. Whatever she was about to say would change Walter's future forever. The lobby was so quiet that no one dared to breathe too loudly. Every eye remained fixed on Walter Hayes. The lead FBI agent stepped forward, holding a small envelope embossed with the Bureau's seal. Director Hayes, she said, the Bureau has spent months discussing this moment. Walter smiled faintly. I had a feeling this wasn't just a courtesy visit. The agent nodded. It isn't. She carefully opened the envelope and removed a formal letter. After unanimous vote by the Executive Leadership Council, the FBI Academy is creating a new leadership and ethical decision-making program for future agents. She paused before continuing. The Bureau would be honored if you would return to serve as its founding director and senior mentor. A ripple of astonishment swept through the crowd. The same man who had spent 25 years quietly mopping floors was now being asked to help shape the next generation of FBI leaders. The CEO stood speechless. The trainees who had mocked Walter looked as though they wished they could disappear. Walter remained silent for several moments. He looked down at the letter, then at the old mop resting beside him. Finally, he looked at the faces surrounding him. I am deeply honored, he said softly. But before I answer, there is something I need to do. He slowly walked toward the group of trainees. Each step echoed through the silent lobby. The young employees lowered their heads, unable to meet his eyes. One of them, the same man who had laughed the loudest, stepped forward with trembling hands. Mr. Hayes, his voice cracked. I'm ashamed of how I treated you. I judge you because of your uniform. I thought your job determined your value. He struggled to continue. I've never been more wrong in my life. The other trainees nodded. Some had tears in their eyes. Walter looked at each of them with kindness. There was no anger, no bitterness, only compassion. He placed a gentle hand on the young man's shoulder. We've all made mistakes. He smiled warmly. What matters is whether we allow those mistakes to make us wiser. The trainee nodded, wiping away a tear. I promise, I'll never look at another person the same way again. Walter squeezed his shoulder gently. "Then today has already been worth more than any award I could receive." The CEO slowly approached. His usual confidence had disappeared. For the first time since founding the company, he seemed unsure of what to say. "Walter," he paused, "I owe you an apology." Walter smiled. "You don't owe me anything." The CEO shook his head. "Yes, I do. I've spent years teaching leadership seminars to our executives." He looked around the lobby. "But today, you taught every one of us what leadership truly looks like." His voice grew emotional. "We celebrated titles. We celebrated promotions. We celebrated success. But we failed to celebrate character." Walter listened quietly. The CEO extended his hand. "I'm sorry we didn't see the extraordinary man walking these halls every single day." Walter accepted the handshake with a warm smile. Then he looked around at everyone gathered in the lobby. "There is something I've learned during my lifetime." The room fell silent once again. "A person's uniform tells you what they do." He paused. "It does not tell you who they are." His words settled over the crowd. "You may meet a billionaire wearing old clothes, a hero carrying a broom, a genius driving a bus, or a future leader serving coffee." He looked directly at the trainees. "So never measure a person's worth by their position. Measure it by the kindness they show when no one is watching." No one spoke. Several employees quietly wiped tears from their eyes. Even the security guards standing near the entrance were visibly moved. The lead FBI agent smiled. "So," she asked, "have you made your decision?" Walter looked once more at the mop that had been his companion for 25 years. He gently leaned it against the janitor's closet door. Then he turned back toward the waiting agents. "I accept." The entire lobby erupted into applause, not because a former intelligence director had accepted an important position, but because they had finally learned that true greatness had been standing among them all along. As Walter walked toward the waiting federal vehicles, every employee instinctively stepped aside, not because they had been instructed to, but because respect had finally replaced assumption. The old janitor they once overlooked was leaving the building, not as a forgotten employee, but as the leader he had always been. And although he would soon help train a new generation of FBI agents, his greatest lesson had already been taught. Inside the very building where people once believed he was just an old man with a mop. 1 year later, Prescott Dynamics was no longer the same company. The marble floors still gleamed every morning, and the offices were just as busy as before. But the people inside had changed. The story of Walter Hayes had become more than an unforgettable memory. It had become part of the company's culture. Every new employee who joined Prescott Dynamics attended a special orientation. On their first day, the lights would dim and a photograph would appear on the screen. It wasn't a picture of the company's founder. It wasn't the CEO. It wasn't even a famous business leader. It was a simple photograph of an elderly janitor standing beside his cleaning cart, wearing a gentle smile. Across the screen appeared 7 words. "Respect everyone. You never know their story." The room would always fall silent. The trainers would tell the story of Walter Hayes, not to impress new employees, but to remind them that true leadership begins with humility. The company also established the Walter Hayes Leadership Award, presented once each year to the employee who best demonstrated integrity, compassion, and service to others. Unlike other awards, it wasn't based on sales, profits, or promotions. It was based entirely on character. Soon, it became the highest honor anyone in the company could receive. Emily Carter's life changed as well. Inspired by Walter's example, she left a position in finance and accepted a new role leading the company's employee development program. Whenever she welcomed new hires, she would share the same message. Never ignore the quiet people. They may be carrying the greatest wisdom you'll ever encounter. Meanwhile, Walter began teaching at the FBI Academy. His classes quickly became the most respected in the entire program. New recruits expected stories about secret missions and classified operations. Instead, on the first day of every class, Walter quietly walked into the room carrying something unexpected, his old wooden mop. The recruits always looked at one another in confusion. Walter would place the mop beside the podium before asking a single question. "What do you see?" Some answered, "A cleaning tool." Others smiled nervously. A janitor's mop. Walter would shake his head. No. He gently rested his hand on the worn wooden handle. I see the greatest leadership lesson I ever learned. The room always became silent. If you ever become too important to respect the person who cleans your office, then you have already failed as a leader. Not one recruit ever forgot those words. Months later, the FBI Academy held its annual graduation ceremony. Families filled the auditorium. Government officials occupied the front rows. The graduating class stood proudly in their dress uniforms. As the ceremony began, the director of the FBI stepped to the podium. Today, he announced, we celebrate men and women who have completed one of the most demanding journeys of their lives. He paused. But before they receive their badges, there is someone we must honor. A spotlight slowly moved across the auditorium until it rested on Walter Hayes. The audience immediately rose to its feet. The applause continued for several minutes. Walter looked genuinely surprised. The director smiled. This man spent decades protecting our nation without asking for recognition. He later spent 25 years cleaning floors without telling anyone who he was. And through both chapters of his life, he demonstrated the same qualities: humility, integrity, and service. The applause grew even louder. Walter slowly stood. He looked around the auditorium before quietly speaking. I've received many honors during my lifetime. He smiled, but none compare to seeing young people choose character over pride. He paused, remembering the words his late wife had spoken years before. When the titles disappear, make sure you remain the same man. For a brief moment, he looked toward the ceiling, as though thanking her. Then he smiled, because he knew his greatest achievement had never been leading classified operations. It had never been the medals or the recognition. His greatest achievement was proving that no honest job is ever small, and that the measure of a person's life is not found in the title they hold, but in the lives they touch. That day, every graduate left the academy carrying more than a badge. They carried a lesson they would remember for the rest of their lives. A lesson first taught by an elderly janitor who had quietly changed the world without asking anyone to notice. Walter Hayes never considered himself a hero. Even after the ceremony at the FBI Academy, he returned to his quiet routine. He still woke up before sunrise. He still enjoyed simple breakfasts. He still greeted strangers with the same warm smile that had brightened the halls of Prescott Dynamics for 25 years. The only difference was that now, people recognized the wisdom behind that smile. Within weeks of the graduation ceremony, Walter's story spread far beyond the walls of the academy. A short interview about his life was shared online. News outlets picked it up. Soon, millions of people around the world were reading about the elderly janitor who had once directed one of the nation's most important intelligence programs. The headlines focused on surprise, but the public focused on something else: his humility. Messages poured in from every corner of the country. Teachers wrote to say they had shared Walter's story with their students. Business owners promised to treat every employee with greater respect. Parents told their children that success should never be measured by money or titles. Even retired veterans reached out to thank Walter for reminding people that the greatest acts of service are often the ones no one ever sees. One afternoon, Walter received a handwritten letter from a 12-year-old boy. The envelope was small and neatly addressed. Inside was a single page. It read, "Dear Mr. Hayes, my dad works as a school custodian. Some kids laugh at him because he cleans classrooms. I used to feel embarrassed when he picked me up after school. After hearing your story, I realized my dad isn't someone to hide. He's someone to be proud of. Thank you for changing the way I see him." Walter quietly folded the letter. For several moments, he couldn't speak. A tear rolled down his cheek, not because of the recognition, but because one child had learned a lesson that many adults spend their entire lives missing. The following weekend, Walter drove to the small town where the boy lived. He knocked gently on the family's front door. When the father opened it, he was stunned. "Director Hayes?" Walter smiled. "You must be Daniel." The custodian nodded in disbelief. "I've admired your service for years." Walter shook his head. "And I've come to thank you. Daniel looked confused. Thank me? Walter smiled warmly. Every day, you create a clean, safe place for children to learn. He extended his hand. That's honorable work. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. For years, he had felt invisible. For years, people had looked through him without ever saying thank you. Yet standing on his front porch was a man admired across the nation, thanking him for doing the very same kind of work. The two men stood in silence before embracing like old friends. A neighbor watching from across the street quietly wiped away tears. Moments like these began happening everywhere. People started thanking bus drivers before getting off the bus. Children greeted cafeteria workers by name. Office employees brought coffee to the security guards who protected their buildings every day. Communities organized appreciation events for cleaners, maintenance crews, gardeners, and sanitation workers. The story of one humble janitor had become something much bigger. It had become a reminder that every honest job deserves respect. Several months later, Walter returned to Prescott Dynamics one final time. Not to work, not to give a speech, simply to visit. As he entered the lobby, something caught his attention. The cleaning cart stood neatly beside the entrance. A young janitor was quietly mopping the same marble floor Walter had cared for so many years. Employees walked past him, but this time, every single one smiled. Several stopped to say, "Good morning. Thank you. We appreciate everything you do." The young janitor smiled with surprise. Walter smiled too. He knew those words weren't being spoken because people knew his story. They were being spoken because people had finally learned its lesson. Walter turned toward the glass doors and stepped outside. The morning sun warmed his face. He took one last look at the building. Then he quietly walked away, not seeking applause, not seeking recognition, only grateful that kindness had become his greatest legacy. Because in the end, the world didn't remember Walter Hayes simply as the FBI director, and it didn't remember him as the elderly janitor. It remembered him as a man who proved that true greatness is found not in the title you carry, but in the respect you show every human being you meet. Walter Hayes' story reminds us of a truth that's easy to forget in a world obsessed with titles, wealth, and status. A person's true value is never found in the job they do, but in the character they carry. For 25 years, people saw only a janitor. They never saw the man who had quietly protected his country. They never saw the sacrifices he had made. And they never realized that the greatest leader in the building was the one holding a mop. Perhaps the greatest lesson Walter left behind wasn't for the FBI, or for Prescott Dynamics, or even for the young trainees who once mocked him. It was for all of us. Every person you meet is fighting battles you cannot see. Every face has a story you may never know. So choose kindness over judgment. Choose respect over assumptions. Because the next person you overlook today could be someone whose life has already changed the world. If Walter Hayes' journey inspired you, touched your heart, or made you see people a little differently, we'd love to hear from you. Did you enjoy this story? What was the most powerful moment for you? Let us know in the comments below. And if you believe everyone deserves dignity and respect, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another unforgettable story. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, remember, true greatness is announced by a title. It is revealed by the way we treat others. Red Heart.